Hello and welcome back to Classic Vinyl Podcast and our Meet the Beatles series. This is a series where we go through the Beatles recordings, at least the UK recordings, in chronological order to the best of our knowledge. And I'm your host, Justin. I'm here with my other host, Tyler.
I'm just happy to be here.
You once again made it.
Yep, I've been allowed into the basement studio again.
So today we've made it to the Beatles' second portion of the Long Tall Sally EP, and that would be Slow Down and Matchbox. Of course, we're doing the Beatles series in chronological order. I'm not going to give any history about the Beatles, really, but you know, it's John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr, and they're my favorite band, one of the most influential bands of all time, if not the most influential band of all time, and the best-selling artist of all time. So there you go. And I'm trying to get Tyler more into the Beatles. I think it's working a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with George Martin or Pete Best, but I'm getting there.
Now, why are you bringing Pete Best into it?
Because he was he was mentioned earlier.
We'll mention him a little bit on one of these songs here.
Okay.
But why don't we get to the song reviews?
I think we should.
And now it's time for the song review.
Okay, so first off, where we're doing the Beatles, Slow Down and Matchbox, I think I know the answer to this.
Yes?
But what is your history with these songs?
None.
First time you've heard them.
You're absolutely right. This is my first time.
We listened to Slow Down twice, and we listened to Matchbox actually 3 times. But we're going to start on Slow Down, so let me give you a little history on this one. So Slow Down was originally written and released by Larry Williams in 1958. Now, it was not very popular in the U.S., but it was a very popular and very influential to all the bands and artists in the U.K. at the time. The Beatles also recorded another Larry Williams song, Dizzy Miss Lizzy, that was on the U.K. album Help and the U.S. album The Beatles 6. So the Beatles version of Slow Down was released on June 19th of 1964 in the UK as a single, and in the US on August 24th of 1964. You've got John Lennon on the lead vocal on this one. Matchbox was the B-side of this one in the US, and it reached number 25 on the Billboard charts in the US. It can now be found on the Past Masters and Live at the BBC albums. So this was on the Beatles' US album, Something New. It was recorded at EMI Studios in London and produced by George Martin. They recorded this song in 6 takes in June of 1964, and I know we've talked about that before, of how some of the songs, they just, like Long Tall Sally, they just laid straight down in 1 take because they've been playing it. But even 6 takes anymore is nothing compared to what's going on in studios nowadays, or even what the Beatles started seeing when they got into their later albums. But so George Martin played the piano on this song, but he actually overdubbed it 3 days after the Beatles recorded the song. So the piano you hear in this song was not part of the recording originally. Lennon's playing his 325 Rick, McCartney's on his 501 Hofner bass, and Harrison's got his 360 12-string Rickenbacker. On the guitar solo on this, there is a dispute of who played the lead guitar between Harrison and Lennon, but the solo is kind of a sloppy solo if you listen to it, and Harrison was very particular with notes. So in a way, it tells me it's Lennon because Harrison does tend to be more precise. Lennon's got more of that rock and roll sloppy style. So I'm guessing it's Lennon, but I don't know for sure. That's just my take on it. So this song, Tyler, I didn't really write what it's about, where the Beatles didn't write it, but you can kind of tell from the lyrics what it's about. What did you think about this song after listening to it?
This is a fun little rock and roller song, very reminiscent of blues rock and roll or juke joint rock and roll. It's got that nice blues style rhythm. Heavy on the guitars, the bass, the drums. It's all heavy, and heavy on the vocals. They brought their A game. I guess I'm not a guitarist myself, so I don't know. I don't pick out the sloppy on being as precise, picking out the chords and everything, or the striking of the guitar strings. But I get what you're saying. And so, yeah, I think you're probably onto something with Lennon being on the lead. So I think you're onto something there. It was a fun song. This is not my favorite Beatles song, and I'm not even sure what more to say about it, but it sounds like it's a boy who's in love with the girl that it seems like she gets around. and he's had his turn, and she's on her way out, but he wants her to slow down and spend more time with him, right?
Yeah, he wants her back. He thinks they can survive this. I don't know if she's cheating on him, running around on him, whatever the deal's going on, but he's not telling her to slow down with him. I think he's actually telling her to speed up with him.
Yeah, speed up with him, but slow down running or leaving him, right?
Yeah, I think that's more the context of it, yeah.
What are your thoughts on this one?
So these two songs are going to be kind of tough for me because when I rate them on a scale, kind of a sliding scale against the Beatles' own work, you know. This song has got a piano intro with the guitar that kicks in. It takes about 40 seconds into the song before Lennon starts singing. So it's got quite a long intro. Don't really like the mix on this song very well, which is kind of going against what you said. I do like Lennon's vocal. At the time, he wanted his vocal doubled all the time. Well, not at the time, he always did. And you can tell it's doubled. It sounds good. It's a good Lennon vocal. The bass isn't very noticeable in this. The drums are kind of tinny to me. It's got a decent solo from the guitar. I don't catch much guitar in the verses, but the solo is a decent guitar work. But it does sound kind of sloppy, and that's why I think it's Lennon, but I could be wrong. I'm not sure on that. Definitely not in my top Beatles songs. It's an okay song. I like the guitar walk down at the ending of it, but that's about all for this song. It's kind of, for the Beatles, for me, it's a little bit of a filler song.
Yeah, it's not one of their showstoppers.
No, but I will say at the same time, these Long Tall Sally EP songs, I don't hear that often because they don't fall on the albums and stuff. So unless I'm throwing on that Past Masters CD or something, or throwing it on Spotify, I just don't hear this or Matchbox as often. But yeah, not a bad song, but certainly not up in my top favorites.
Yeah, I will say this, though. You can tell what songs the Beatles really like singing, and they really like singing or playing these rock and rollers. Right?
Yeah, it was a big thing for him. Larry, I mean, obviously with the Larry Williams song, they did this one and they did Dizzy Miss Lizzie. We're going to get on to Matchbox now. That is a Carl Perkins song, and they did a few of his songs. We'll get into that. So on Matchbox, it's a rockabilly bluesy song originally written and recorded by Carl Perkins in 1957. Now, the Beatles were huge fans of Carl Perkins. They absolutely adored him, and they did record 3 of his songs. Matchbox, this one we're doing here, Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, and Honey Don't. So they were into Carl Perkins, there's no doubt. So the Beatles version of Matchbox was released on June 19th of 1964 in the UK on the Long Tall Sally EP, and in Canada as well on the Long Tall Sally album. And the single was released in the US on August 24th of 1964. This was obviously the B-side of Slow Down, the first song. It was also released on the Beatles' US album Something New. The lead vocal on this one is kind of weird because, talking about Pete Best, the early Beatles, Pete Best was the one that sang the vocal on this. Although Lennon would sing the vocal live after they fired Pete Best for a while, so Lennon did the vocal live. It'd be interesting to hear that, but obviously the lead vocal on the recorded version that we listened to is by Ringo Starr. Now, this reached number 17 on the Billboard charts in the US. Just like the other song, it can now be found on Past Masters and the Live at the BBC albums. George Martin also played piano on this song. So this is basically about a poor boy. You know, he's a long way from home, walking away from a toxic relationship. That's where you get that, well, I'm sitting here wondering, will a matchbox hold my clothes? That's kind of a poor reference, right? Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on Matchbox?
I'm not going to mention Mr. Pete Best anymore because, well, I don't need your email getting overloaded with hate mail for me and requests to replace me.
It's funny because when Pete Best was originally let go from the band, there was a lot of hate for the band, especially in the UK, you know, where they were popular. Why would you ever replace Pete Best with Ringo Starr?
Yeah, he has Best in his name, right?
Well, and Ringo was popular at the time. He was in Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, but Pete Best was kind of the best looking of the group.
Oh.
And so he was very popular with women, but he's obviously not half the drummer Ringo is.
And so they replaced him with Ringo. Oh, my.
Yeah.
Okay. I got to say, you know, Ringo has he's got a good voice for this. He fits right in. Matchbox, this is a good match to the A side of Slow Down. It's another blues song. The guitar solo in here is really, really good. Ringo's got a good sounding voice, fits in very nicely with the Beatles, but I did find that it was kind of difficult to make out some of what he was saying. And I'm not sure if that's because of the mixing or his articulation wasn't so great. Maybe maybe a combination of both. I wasn't having quite as much fun with this song as I was the A-side. It's not bad. Another one of those rockabilly, 1950s style rockers. And they're fun. I don't know that I have too much to say about them. What do you have to? What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I'm completely opposite than you, and I can't believe I'm going to say this because I normally wouldn't, but
Get out your house.
yeah, get out of my house. No, no, I think this should have been the A-side song, and I think this song sang by Ringo is a stronger song than the A-side sang by John.
Interesting.
Yeah, and maybe that just comes down because it's the guitar and the mixing. Because it opens up with the guitar, it's got good bass you can hear. The guitar is good through the verses. It's got a really good solo in it. Like you said, I think it's better than the first solo on the other song. The piano is used better in this song, not so overdriving and kind of annoying like it is in Slow Down to me. It just fits in better. Ringo, although he doesn't have a great frontman's voice, there's certain songs that cater well to his voice, and I think this is one of them. You know, I mean, you get into the later songs like Yellow Submarine and Octopus's Garden and kind of the, I wouldn't say goofy songs, but more the character songs. Those fit well with him because they're just kind of loving songs in a way, but to me, his voice fits really well with this. I've seen him play this live a couple times now because I've seen the All-Star Band play, and they played this both times, and he still sings it really well. I just think musically, take the lyrics out of the song. So I'm not really saying I like a Ringo vocal better than a John, because I think on Slow Down, I think the vocal is the strong point of that song. I don't think the vocal's the strong point of this song. I think it's the guitar and the music to me. But I definitely rate this song a little higher, and I think it probably could have been the A-side, but I don't think at the time Egos would have allowed Ringo to be an A-side single over John or Paul. So.
And, Ringo's the kind of guy that can swallow his pride enough to allow for that, right?
Yeah, yes, you can. And this is a good song. Although, both of these are covers. I'm not in love with either song, but I appreciate they're part of the Beatles canon, without a doubt. Do you want to get the song ratings?
Let's rate them.
Song rating.
Okay, if this is your first episode, our rating system, I'll explain pretty briefly. 0 to 10, 10 being the best, and 5 being smack in the middle. So with that being said, I'm going to put Slow Down at a 7. It's just not really my style of Beatles music. But if I'm in a mood for some rockabilly music or some of that old blues style rock and roll, this is a good go-to. Where do you put this one?
Well, both of these songs fall into my lower tier of Beatles songs, but I still enjoy them. I don't skip them when they come on. Obviously, there's only a couple Beatles songs that I absolutely have to skip when they come on, and we'll get to those later. But I rate this one a 6 on the Beatles scale, and it's okay. It's a good song. I'm glad it exists, but also at the same time, it's definitely not even in mid to upper range for me. So what do you think on Matchbox?
On Matchbox, one of the things that you pointed out towards the end of your review on it is that this isn't that the vocals are not the star of this song. And in that context, it makes more sense to me. That this is a better song than I'm going to rate it. I'm going to put it at a 6. And the reason I'm giving it a 6 is that the vocals just were not as clear. But in the context, I think you're going to put this one higher. I get why you like this one better than Slow Down with that in mind. So, I put this one at a 6, but where do you put it?
It's funny because this is probably the only, if we're pairing songs together, it's the only Ringo vocal I'm going to say is better than any other Beatle vocal, because generally I don't really care for the Ringo vocals. Probably my favorite Ringo vocal would be Octopus's Garden, and that's because it's his song, and his voice just doesn't lend well to certain songs. It just doesn't. In fact, I like his solo stuff better than I like anything he did with the Beatles, so there's that. But I rate this song a 7. I think it would have been very interesting to hear a Lennon vocal recorded on the studio in this one. Maybe even a McCartney vocal, in that style, a Little Richard like he does, or something like that would have been really interesting. But I do think it is one of Ringo's stronger vocals, and the music suits his vocal on this one more than it does some other songs. His voice doesn't stick out as funny to me on it. It's a better song for me in the Beatles catalog than Slow Down is.
All right.
So that's the Beatles, Slow Down and Matchbox, and that finishes up our Long Tall Sally EP. I think we're on to the Hard Day's Night album next, so we'll get that out.
It's coming.
It's coming soon, so we appreciate you listening to us. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, send us an email to classicvinylpodcast@gmail.com. And once again, we appreciate you listening, so until next time, we'll see you later.
See ya.
Thank you so much for listening to Classic Vinyl Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at Classic Vinyl Podcast for updates, and also share us with your music-loving friends.